Okay, I guess we're going to get started. Welcome to the Historical House. We're really pleased to have with us Robert Cox is going to talk about New England pie, and please give him a warm welcome.
I can see I'm losing my ability to do this. I used to teach a class with 300 students when I was in Michigan. And I would go up at the front of the stage, and when it was time to start, I would just sit there like this, and everyone would shut up. You people haven't learned.
We're slow learners.
Yeah. So I'll apologize, do my apologies up front. The obvious thing, as you'll note when I go into this, is that I am not a cook. I eat, but cooking is not something I do. I'm actually completely incompetent. I can dial for pizza. I can order Chinese food, and that's about as far as I go. So anything I say about cooking techniques or anything like that, take with a grain of salt. I don't know very much. I'm a historian. That's kind of what I do. And so what I've, what drew me to the topic here is the history and the cultural reasons behind why New England has such a love of pie. My second apology is that I'm actually not a New Englander, and I've been here for a while now. I can drink the water, I have all that down, but I am a native Californian, so it's not just a New Englander, I'm like on the other coast. So the whole point of this book was to think about why it is that this strange region of the country has this strange affection for this strange food. So, I'm a foreigner. It's okay. You can't deport me. I'm a native. But I thought I would start off because I have a group of people here who know pie, because you're New Englanders, you know pie. New Englanders have had a love of pie since New England began being settled in the 17th century by English settlers. It's not strictly an English food, but the English have a profound love of pie and brought it with them when they came here. So let me ask you, what is the best part of any pie? Okay, so you are a typical New England crowd, okay? I'm just going to say that. Whenever I ask this question, now, outside of Connecticut, where they seem to be very strange indeed, but in New England, they will say crust, 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 and then someone will say, oh, what about the middle? Good. There are only two parts of the pie. You can't fail. Now, the definition of a pie, pretty much, is, I would say I'm going to have to do these manually because I couldn't get that kind of word. The definition of a pie is pretty much something wrapped around with a pastry. And crust can be on the bottom, it can be on the top, it can be on both. This is a set of pies from East Hampton Baker, Small Oven. And if you don't know Small Oven, I actually don't get a kickback from them, but I wish I did because they are really, really great. Two women who founded this bake shop about 3 years ago, and they're fantastic, everything they do. These are their pies. And you can see a couple of varieties in the crust. There are a few varieties in crust. You have a crust on the bottom, you have a crust on the top and the bottom. Some have just a crust on the top. Some will have a lattice top. Some will have various vents and holes and pores and all sorts of different varieties. But crust is kind of essential to a pie. It's not practically part of the definition. But if I'd ask the question about what the best part of the pie is in this room, let's say 250 years ago, nobody would have said the crust. Nobody would have at all. When New Englanders came here, when Englanders came here to New England, brought their pies with them, the pies were in some ways like modern pies, but they differed in at least one really critical respect, and that's the crust. Back then, crust was made out of just flour, water, maybe a little bit of salt, but usually just flour and water. And you took that mixture and created I wouldn't call it a crust, but a dough-like thing, and you create a little pot in that dough in which you put some sort of substance, and then you sealed it over with the rest. And that went into an oven, and the ovens were wood-fired or maybe fired by something else, usually wood fired, and they would bake and they would bake and they would bake and they would do what pies do. That's take those contents, and then by baking over a long period of time, and here's where I am at my limit of competence, those ingredients steep and become more and more flavorful, more and more pronounced, more and more married together in a way that you don't get in an open pot or in other kinds of cooking techniques. The crust holds everything in, concentrates the flavors, makes them purer to what they are. And I might get back to that if I actually remember that. But the crust itself in this baking process becomes hard and basically inedible. They call them coffins, and it's not actually because it's where you went, it's what they look like in the old sense of the term coffin, an enclosure. So these old crusts were not particularly delectable. They were doled out to children or dogs, pigs, anything you didn't care about. You would give these crusts away, and they were the kind of thing that were maybe eaten, but they were the last thing you would want to choose. What you wanted to do was go to that crust, break it open, and get the contents out that had steeped and gotten richer in flavor, and the rest was just sort of leftover, like the bones. Some people like to chew on bones. Here you can chew on crust. So crust was really quite different back then, but sometime in the 18th century, some cooking genius came along and recognized that if you mixed a little bit of fat or butter, which is, after all, fat, into your pastry mixture, into your flour and your water, you could create a very light and flaky crust out of it. And through the 18th century, people recognized that shortening the crust took it from this baked, hard, impermeable shell into something that was light and flaky and actually delectable. And you went from a situation where people ate the crust reluctantly or gave it to the lowest status people in the family, to a situation where crust really became the most prominent thing. So crust by the late 18th century is attaining its modern special status, so that when I ask that question, what's the best part of the pie, I hear in Massachusetts where they know pie, not in Connecticut where they don't, but in Massachusetts, 9 times out of 10 they'll answer crust, 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 and then someone will say, oh, but the interior too. So by the time the first cookbook published in America comes out, it's published, first cookbook published by an American on American food in America comes out. It's Amelia Simmons' American Cookery, published in Hartford in 1796. That cookbook comes out, and it has, sure enough, recipes for pies. And like most of these recipes in that period of time, they're very, very simple. I reproduce a couple in the book. But the recipes basically for a fruit pie are take fruit, put in crust, bake. Good enough. Or maybe it's a little more elaborate to say, take fruit, add sugar, put in crust, bake. That's it. That's an Amelia Simmons recipe. Trust me. I'm violating copyright right now. But Simmons does something that no other American cook had done previously, or most other British cooks hadn't done previously. Before she gets to her section on pies, she has a section on crusts. And she has crusts 1 through 9 numbered. Crust 1, crust 2, crust 3, crust 4. And what distinguishes Amelia Simmons' cookery is you say, for a fruit pie, take crust number 3, add fruit and sugar, bake. And crust number 3 is one of these crusts that is designed to be very flaky and light so that you would use it with a delicate fruit pie. There are other crusts that are more like a puff pastry. There are other crusts that are more like the sort of heavier crust, the beefier crust that you would have with a meat pie. So let me ask the second question here, and this is the end of the quiz. Okay, you have a quiz. This is the end of the quiz right now. You've gotten 50% so far, so you can pass if you get this one right. But since I have New Englanders here, the first question I had when I started this book, I knew I was going to write on pie, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to approach it. My first question was, well, what's a good New England pie?
Apple.
Apple is a good choice.
Blueberry.
Blueberry is an even wiser choice. But apple's a great choice. Apples came here very early on. When the Puritans settled in Plymouth, 1620, they brought apples with them. When they settled in Boston, 1635, they brought apples with them, planted an orchard up on Beacon Hill, in Common. So you had apples here very, very early on, and apples really spread in Massachusetts like nothing. Apples were a great fruit for this climate, and every town in Massachusetts in the 18th and 19th century had apple trees growing wherever you looked. And those apple trees were often very specific. There were hundreds of little varieties of apples all around New England. If you go to Clarkdale Orchards up in South Deerfield, I think Clarkdale's over there, they run an incredible number of historic apples that are really fantastic. There are things like the Rhode Island Greeting, the Roxbury Russet, the Westfield Seek No Further, the Baldwin. I mean, I could go on. They make people cough. They're so good. There are apples all over New England. And apple pie is, sure enough, one of the oldest and favorite pies in New England. It is one of those pies that any New Englander at any time would have said, this is one of my favorite pies. My objection to apple pie is I grew up in California. My mother's from Washington State. So, you know, we own the apple pie in California and the cranberry pie. No, we own the apple pie in California. But the point is, apple pie is no longer just a New England pie. It's a national pie. It's as American as apple pie, right? That sort of thing. H. Rap Brown. It is apple pie intrinsic to this nation, not just to this region. So we have blueberry, which I think is a really, really great choice. Blueberry is one of two native fruits to New England. One of the two that have been cultivated successfully commercially. What's the other one?
Cranberry.
Cranberry is the other native New England fruit. So those are great New England pies, but blueberry, I'm sorry, is also, I live in Colorado, went to high school in Colorado. You know, we're up in the mountains of Colorado, what do we have? We have blueberry pie. You know, you go down to the local bakery in Pueblo, and they got blueberry. So, that's not New England pie anymore. Any other ideas for New England pies? Pumpkin, rhubarb. I love rhubarb. This is the perfect time of year for rhubarb. It's probably my favorite pie. Squash is an excellent choice.
Pumpkin pie.
Pumpkin pie is as American as anything, but it is also New England. Even when you eat pumpkin pie in California, you feel guilty for not being a New Englander, because that's what New England their pie is. But squash pie is actually the original. Squash was preferred to pumpkin. I'll probably come back to that story a little bit. But we had lots of different pies. The thing is, lots and lots of different pies. And I started this book by asking, what is the most authentic New England pie? And all of these came up, and I had so many of them when I started listing. And I said, I can't, how am I going to write about all these pies? And I didn't. I just couldn't. There's so many pies. I could go on and on and on. New England is unique in the country. Well, maybe not truly unique, but New England is unusual in this country because we not only have an affection for all those sweet pies that we've just been talking about, but the savory pies as well. So I said, let's talk about authenticity, and I have to take savory and I have to take sweet and I have to look at both. So the first thing I did was I said, let me think if there's anything that's truly unique to New England. And this is the one that I think I have as probably my candidate. All wrong. All wrong.
Raisins.
Mincemeat.
Maple. Maple walnut. This is a maple slurry. Now it is almost exactly like a pecan pie. And if I serve it to you, most people would say this is a weird pecan pie. But this is from the Chelsea Royal Diner up near Brattleboro. Just on Route 9 west of Brattleboro, really hole-in-the-wall kind of place that has this pie. This is a very rare pie these days. It has always been sort of uncommon, but you used to see it in places that did a lot of maple sugaring. And they take that maple and you slurry it down with lots of things, and you get this slurry, little ground up walnut on top, and you create something that is remarkable, like a pecan pie, but has its own slight twist. It doesn't taste mapley. You wouldn't leap out and say, that's a lot of maple. It doesn't taste like that. But it is a very unique New England pie. But the pie that I started my book with came from my mother-in-law, who makes a pie that I had not heard of before I came to New England. This is the other thing that I think is close to New England pie as you can get. Not yet. This is a tourtière or a French meat pie. So my mother-in-law, who's actually, I'll say up front, not a bad human being, was born in Vermont, grew up in Maine, spoke only French until she started in school and then learned English. And she makes this every year, and we went to her, Danielle, my wife and I went to her, and said, okay, Rob's doing this book, could you make an authentic French meat pie? And she said, of course. This is a pie that is served during the winter, usually around Christmas time. Holiday pie, absolutely. Holiday pie. This is a pie that is pretty closely associated in French Canadian communities with midnight mass on Christmas Eve. This is the thing that you would serve when you come back. It is a celebratory pie, and that's the status it had in her family. And so she said, yes, I can do this. She took out her grandmother's recipe. And her grandmother's recipe, she said, you know, I make it my own way. That's the way she started. I make it my own way, but my grandmother is authentic. This is authentic. If you want authentic, it's authentic. It's the way it was. My grandmother came from Canada, and this is authentic. So she took 50-50 pork and beef, added in, I think there's some onion in there, I don't remember for sure, but mashed potato. And that's what makes a French meat pie. It comes out of the oven looking a bit like this. What really distinguishes a French meat pie is that it's highly spiced. There's a spice mixture that goes into French meat pie that's really distinctive. It starts with clove, usually includes cinnamon, mace, and a few other things, but clove is a dominant flavor, and clove is dominant flavor with cinnamon shortly after that. And in Canada especially, it's a little more heavily spiced. So when she was making this, you know, I was filming her as she was making this, and she was saying, you know, I feel bad because I hate to say it, but I feel like I've stabbed my grandmother in the back. I said, why? She said, because I've gone away from her recipe. I deviated. I said, why have you deviated? She said, well, it started a bunch of years ago when Danielle and her sister Michelle were very young, and they didn't like the clove. So I started reducing the clove. All right, it's not so bad. She says, no, then I eliminated it. and then I didn't like the cinnamon because it tasted kind of funny, so I cut that out too. And then this was the really embarrassing thing for her. She said, after cutting that out, this is kind of lacking something because it's basically just mashed potato and beef, and what are you going to do with that? So she said, I figured out on my own that I could substitute something for those spices. Bell's Poultry Seasoning, a New England mix. And she said, this is the great sin. I'm not only cutting out these flavors that my grandmother loved so much, but I'm substituting this horrible sort of premixed thing, and it feels like I'm cutting corners and stabbing her in the back. She said, whatever you do, just don't tell anybody I've ever done this. And Danielle said, he's writing a book, and her response was, yeah, well, no one will read it. So, she isn't a bad person, but it's funny because I thought this is an interesting story, and I'll come back to it, but authenticity here for her was following this old recipe, following what her grandmother did, making it like it was, and I'll come back to talking about that at the very end. But she ended up doing bells, and I thought, well, that's an interesting thing that you substitute bells for this. And she started hitting on the bells a little bit harder year after year after year, until her little granddaughter came in, Sophie, came in one Christmas and said, Grandma, cut back on the bells. So now we're back to a normal thing. She made the last French meat pie she made was one where she went back to the cinnamon and clove. And my God, it's good when you hit it right. This is a loved pie in French Canadian communities. If you go to East Hampton, which was until the 80s anyway, pretty noticeably French. Now they've merged the French and the Polish and the Italian churches, and they're kind of all together. But back in the day, they Irish, not Italian in East Hampton, sorry. But they've merged those all. But the French community has more or less disappeared, but the French meat pie has not. When they have their annual tri-parish thing, they sell the pierogies and all that, but you also see French meat pies. If you go to Big E, our local grocery store, and you go to the back of Big E, they have the frozen French meat pie back there. And you go to Lowell, you go to Lawrence, you go to any of those other French Canadian communities around New England, you'll see the same thing. It's pretty amazing to me that this is really held on. And I did a little bit of research, meaning going into Google, and found that other people have found that you can substitute bells and create something that is not unlike these authentic tastes. But there is a second set of things that I noticed when I started on this, and you've already sort of gotten part of the way there. And that is, it's not, in New England, it's not just a question of whether the pie is authentic. Because in New England, New Englanders have developed an odd love for what I call the false pie. The thing that is called a pie that is not a pie. Now, if Danielle were here, I would tell this story because it embarrasses the hell out of her every time I tell it. But she said, when I asked her what her memories of pie were growing up, we talked about French bean pie. She said, well, my primary memory is traumatic. And I said, what's traumatic about pie? She said, I went to first grade. She's a very shy kid, very small. Went to kindergarten as a shy child, and the teacher, just to grill the kids early in the term, gathered them around a rug in the middle and said, okay kids, we're going to share. And that's, that sounds terrible to a little kid like Danielle. But she says, okay, what did you do during the summer? What's your favorite color? She finally said, what's your favorite pie? Danielle said, I got this one. I know what my favorite pie is. I can answer this. So they go, the loud kids go first, and they answer just like you did, apple. That's always the first one. Some kid over the corner says apple. Some real smart aleck kid says chocolate cream pie and everything. So he's been to France. There's going down the line, banana cream who tries to outdo the chocolate. A couple more apples. Maybe there's a blueberry mixed in there. But she finally comes to see the teacher says, Danielle, what's your favorite pie? And Danielle says, I got it. She says, my favorite pie is a shepherd's pie. And everybody laughed. The teacher laughed. The students laughed. The teacher laughed so much, she got the teacher next door, brought him over and said, Danielle, what's your favorite pie? She said, shepherd's pie. And he said, ah! And laughed at her again. So she has never gone back to school a day in her life, but shepherd's pie was her favorite. This is a shepherd's pie from Atkins Farm, oddly enough. It's actually not a shepherd's pie, it's a pâte de chine, which is beef and corn, nothing else, with mashed potato on top. But why the heck is this called a pie? So historically I said, this is not a pie, this is the death of leftovers. And there's not much more you can say about it. But when you start looking, you say, there might be a logic to calling this pie. There might. If you turn back time a little bit, you go back into the 19th century, there are two pies that compete, one versus the other. Shepherd's pie and cottage pie. Shepherd's pie and cottage pie. Some people say shepherd's pie has to be made with lamb. I was insisted at the last talk that shepherd's pie is only made with lamb. And I said, I can show you recipes where it's beef, it's pork, it's lamb, it's whatever you want. Cottage pie is always beef, but no, cottage pie is beef or pork or lamb. The terms are sort of interchangeable. They are maybe a little bit different, but they are fundamentally the same pie. But if you go back into the late 18th century and you look for the earliest recipes for shepherd's pie, at least that I could find, you see one slight difference. And that is, instead of having mashed potato on top, in these early recipes, you'll see sliced potatoes laid on top in a layer. And I look at that and say, okay, that's like a pastry. There's no pastry here, which is the definition of pie, but that's like a pastry. I can go with that. So that's bad. But New Englanders have other false pies. The most famous New England false pie is this monstrosity, the Boston cream pie, which is actually the official state pie of Massachusetts. So in keeping with Massachusetts political history, we have named a false pie as our official pie.
Only in Massachusetts.
Not only in Massachusetts, hold that thought, okay? But we have done it. So I look at this thing and say, how could you possibly call this a pie? There's nothing pie-like about this. This is two pieces of cake with a little pastry filling and maybe some chocolate on top and some nuts around the corner. There's nothing about it. This is actually from the Parker House, where it originated. And Danielle was right over here. She ate it, I did not. But this pie has been called a pie since it originated in the 1840s, if I remember. Well, why is it a pie? Well, I don't know. But I have some ideas about why it's popular. And it's popular not because it is so good, people like it or don't like it. It's a little too sweet for me most days. But it's popular, I think, because it came about at a particular moment in American history that made it popular. And I'll follow up on that in a second. This pie came about in the 1840s when the Parker House was at that moment in its evolution where it was trying to become the most elegant, best hotel in the country. And to do that, you need to rid yourself of bed bugs, and you need to bring in a really good restaurant. Because before the Civil War, in America, fine dining was not in restaurants, it was in hotels. If you wanted a good meal, you went to a hotel. And you went to the best hotel in town for the best restaurant. So Parker House, wanting to be the best in the country, said, what are we going to do to get a good cook? Let's go to France. And they got a guy named Saint-Zien who came over, and Saint-Zien introduced this thing very early on that he called the Boston cream pie. Now what's interesting about it to me is that this Boston cream pie is very similar in many ways to two other pies that were very popular at the time. And they're not pies either. They are two layers of cake with a middling layer here of, in the case of the two that I'm about to mention, usually a strawberry or raspberry, which is quite different than pastry cream, but the idea is the same. And they're topped usually with maybe a little powdered sugar. Not usually soft chocolate. But chocolate also was not de rigueur in every Boston pie recipe for quite a while. Boston cream pie. The Washington pie and the Lafayette pie are those two super popular pies. The Lafayette pie probably started around middle 1820s. The Washington pie maybe a little bit before that. And if you think about the period of time from the 1820s to the 1840s, and you look around about what Americans were thinking and doing culturally at the time, they were looking increasingly at their older generation and saying, you know, the generation of people who witnessed and participated in the American Revolution is passing quickly all around us. We need to commemorate them. We need to think about them. So they began putting up memorials and monuments all over village greens throughout New England, all over the country, in fact. They began naming things after Washington. Washington Street, the city of Washington was already named Washington, but all this activity surrounding commemorating that revolutionary generation was very important. And it sort of all continued all the way up until the Civil War. There's a book, one of my favorite books by a guy named Hilliard, published in 1864, called The Last Men of the American Revolution, where this guy took a camera and he went anywhere in the country he could find a veteran of the American Rev in 1864, all of whom were 99, 100, 105 years old, found 6 of them and took photographs of them. And this book is constructed a little biography of each, and the photograph is actually that is pasted into the book in front of each chapter. And they sold those little photos separately as well, so that you could commemorate them and could keep them close to you. But the Washington pie is this thing that circulated around to commemorate Washington. It was an incredibly popular pie. 2 pieces of cake, little strawberry or raspberry in the middle, a little powdered sugar on top, not much to it, but it was very popular. And the Boston cream pie, in a way, is tying into this history, tying into thinking about not just that we can be a great hotel, a grand hotel here, that we can be as good as anything in Europe, but that we can tie it into an American identity, Washington and Lafayette. And these 3 pies were often confused, completely confused, for many years. By the 1880s, there's a little poem that appears in the Boston Globe in which these pies have been confused for a long time. They're often served very, very poor quality versions. And so somebody wrote to the Globe in 1889, and this is part of the poem. It says, "The mighty name of Washington, what vandal dare to lie with this malign monstrosity that's neither cake nor pie?" They knew it wasn't pie. A messy, mucilaginous, pestiferous compound. Why should language bold be hold such libel bold upon both George and pie? You know, if you can use mucilaginous in a poem, you won the day. what happened is that the Lafayette pie faded from view. Lafayette's importance to the Revolution really was secondary to Washington, even at the height. But as time went on, he became less and less the guy people looked to as the memory of the Revolution. Washington pie continued to be very, very popular. If you look in the first third of the 20th century, you'll still see associated with Washington birthday celebration the Washington pie being wheeled out. There are, newspaper articles on so-and-so trying to make the world's largest Washington pie, etc. But even that faded. The Boston cream pie continued. Now why? I think it's for one reason only. It has that history. It has that history of how it was made by a French chef. It has that history that ties it into the American story. But it's also a history of marketing by the Parker House. Those guys knew what they were doing. They stood by and marketed the Boston cream pie, while the other pies just sort of faded away. So by the 20th century, the Boston cream pie becomes more and more popular, to the point that in the 1990s, I'm forgetting now, boy, when it became the official state pie of Massachusetts. There was a high school teacher, Needham, who wanted to instruct his students in civics. And he said, let's get a bill passed in the state legislature. And a group of 14-year-old kids get their head together. What do they think of? They think of pie. They think, let's name the Boston cream pie the official state pie of Massachusetts. They got it passed, which shows the corruption of the legislature and the poverty of our educational system all in one. But I do like the Boston cream pie because at Parker House, if you'd gone there in about 1914 or so, you would have found a guy working in the kitchen in a bakery named Ho Chi Minh, whose job it was to bake Boston cream pies, the great American pie. A few years later, if you would have gone there, you would have seen a busboy named Malcolm X, Malcolm Little at that point, who was cleaning up after Boston cream pies. So I don't know how many pies can draw in Marquis de Lafayette, George Washington, Ho Chi Minh, and Malcolm X, but the Boston cream pie can. There is one other monstrosity of a false pie that has taken root in New England, and I warn you, this is trigger warning time, I warn you to be on the edge of your seats here. This pie has really, really, really tenacious supporters. This thing, the Whoopie Pie, is beloved in Maine. Paul Page and the Whoopie Pie are beloved in Maine, the current governor. The Whoopie Pie is the official state treat of Maine, just so you know. Now, the Whoopie Pie is nothing pie-like whatsoever. It's got 2 pieces of inedible cake with an overly sweet and somewhat disgusting frosting in the middle. I'm just telling the truth. I'm here to speak truth. Okay? The Whoopie Pie is a monstrosity, and it is loved in Maine. So a few years ago, this guy Ed Davis, who is a state rep for Dover Foxcroft in Maine, got in his mind around the month of November that he would introduce a bill to name the Whoopie Pie the official state pie of Maine. He thought that would be a great idea. And he thought, people would get behind this because, in Massachusetts they got this pie, this non-pie name, a pie down there. We can do that in Maine too. It was actually before we did it. Anyway, it's okay. So Davis introduced the bill, and he thought it would just sail through because everyone loves pie and will vote for it. And Whoopie Pie, everybody in Maine loves Whoopie Pie. I don't know why, but they do. So he introduced this bill, and he found immediately that he was ever so wrong. He started getting attacked. He's a Republican from this small district, and he got attacked from the Republicans because he was wasting time. We should be cutting taxes. We should be kicking people off welfare. We should be doing whatever else they do, Republicans in Maine do. We shouldn't be wasting time on this frivolous bill. The Democrats, predictably enough, attacked him as well. One of them said, what are you doing? You're introducing a bill to take this inedible and nutrient-free monstrosity that is nothing but a machine for injecting frosting into the guts of our overweight children. Why are you doing this? But Davis insisted that he was right and that he would persist, and he did. What he didn't recognize at first was that it wouldn't just be political fighting in the legislature, but that Pennsylvania would come to the act, because the only state other than Maine, to be stupid enough to want to claim the Whoopie Pie as their own is Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, where I lived before coming here, I speak from knowledge, they think that this pie is an Amish treat. The idea, I think, somehow is that Amish women would whip these up, throw them into the husband's lunchbox, and when they got to the work site, they would open it up and look in and say, "Oh, whoopie a pie." I'm not sure that it's a German word. Whoopie is probably not a Pennsylvania Dutch word, but nevertheless, they got incensed in Lancaster County and in Delaware County and Chester County and other places in southeastern Pennsylvania. Lancaster County, they actually had protests down at the local courthouse where people carried signs in the snow and the driving rains and "Give us whoopee or give us death." Davis was not going to be perturbed by this. He had a leg up. The Pennsylvania people were threatening to make it their state pie. Davis got further. So he began cutting deals in the legislature to get this passed. He finally ran into the most powerful lobby in Maine, which is what? The blueberry lobby, exactly. And the blueberry lobby said, "No, there is no way. You cannot have this thing be the official state pie of Maine because the blueberry pie is the royalty of pie. It is the king and queen and emperor and empress of pie. We must name the blueberry pie." So Davis recognized a way to cut a deal, and he said, "We will do that. The blueberry pie will be the official state pie. This will be the official state treat." And the legislature went through. He got it passed. Now, Davis said that this was an act of economic courage, I guess you could say. He didn't say that quite. He's a nice guy. He said this is an economic incentive for his area. He said, "Dover Foxcroft, we have a lot of small independent bakers. And what do? They make pies. They make whoopie pie. They sell them to unsuspecting tourists. They will benefit by having this our official state treat." He said, "I represent Dover Foxcroft. What is Dover Foxcroft known for?" Correct. So you're now 2 for 3. That's good. But no one knows Dover Foxcroft except for the annual Whoopie Pie Festival, when the town doubles in size for a week, and people come in from who knows where, crawling out from rocks in New York or wherever they come from, to eat these things. And they go away. They leave whoopie bones all over the street when they leave. But whoopie pie injects a huge amount of cash into that local economy. And Davis says, in retrospect, he was right. It was a bill that brought economic benefit to his district. So more power to him. This is a good story. So New Englanders are not just about false pies. We are also fixated on what I would call out-and-out mockery of pies. So I had not expected when I started the book to think about the idea of mockery in cooking. But when I started looking around, I saw these recipes that say a mock something pie or a mock something dish. And I recognized, hey, wait a minute, I got mock turtle soup stuck in the back of my mind. Mock turtle soup is this thing that actually turns out to be quite an old dish. It goes back to the turn of the 18th century, when British mariners are going all across the world, and when you're out at sea for months at a time, you're eating the stores that you have on ship, the dry things, the things that are usually not terribly tasty, the pickled and preserved things, crackers and whatever else you got, but fresh is something special at sea. And one of the fresh foods they could get at sea was the turtle. And this became a particular favorite of British sailors. When they came back on shore, they brought this taste with them. But these turtles that are fairly available when you're cruising on the Caribbean and the South Atlantic are not terribly available in the English Midlands or in the Lake District. The little turtles you see in the woods don't taste the same as these big maritime turtles. So cooks there recognized that if you get these turtles at all, and they were often not available, they were very, very expensive. So they found ways of taking other ingredients and masking them, playing with them to make them seem like something they were not. And I think that's a brilliant thing. And mock turtle started this. Mockery went in various forms much further back, but mock turtles became one of these sort of fonts out of which a whole shooting match of mockery came. This is mockery from a single cookbook published in 1830. Mock recipes. Mock hare, mock goose, mock mutton broth, mock pheasant, mock venison, mock gooseberry, mock tomatoes, mock capers, mock turkey, mock salmon, mock crab, mock chicken croquettes, mock chop suey, which is mockery of mockery, mock lady cake, mock loaf cake, mock meat pie, mock cream pie, mock lemon pie, mock. So whatever's going on here is catching on. Cooks are recognizing that you can take something that is super expensive or super rare, and you can take something else to seem like that. You can take something that is really abundant and make it seem like something that is very special and unique. And that's a great thing as a cook. Particularly in the days when you're not in a global world like we are now, where we have no seasons anymore, in effect. If you want gooseberry now, you can get gooseberry. If you want gooseberry then, you waited until gooseberry season. If you want turtle now, you can dial up and someone in Cuba will send you a turtle. I don't know. But back then, it was not so easy. So I thought, what about mock pie? Now I heard one of you mention the most famous mock pie of all. The mock apple pie, right? Now, the last time I talked about this, somebody in the audience said, I love it. I felt very sorry for him, but he loved this stuff. I remember this as a kid growing up, and I'd always assumed that this was another motive for mocking. It wasn't just because apples are too expensive or that they're rare, because they sure aren't. Not to me, anyway. Why would you mock something like this? And I thought, well, what it is pretty clearly it's just an excuse to sell more Ritz crackers, right? That's all it is. And I thought the recipe might go back to the 50s, or maybe I'm wrong and the Ritz crackers go back to the 40s, maybe in the 30s, something like that. I was wrong. How old do you think the mock apple pie recipe might be? 1830s.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a huge surprise to me. In the 1830s, there's a recipe for what I think is one of the most beautifully named pies. You have chess pie, sounds really exotic, or Derby pie. This is chemical pie. I love it. And it is a mock apple pie. And what you see going on here is taking crackers, this fairly bland substrate, a little buttery flavor to it maybe, but a blandness to it. And you add cream of tartar and lemon juice. And the cream of tartar and the lemon juice mixed together in a chemical reaction to create a flavor like malic acid, that bite that you have in apples. And it is deceiving. It is close enough that what results taste like apples. The texture, I don't understand the texture. It's like people go to this thing and they lose all sense of proportion and flavor, but it is there. It tastes right. So this has been around since the 1830s. We're going on 200 years of chemical pie, of cracker pie, of mock apple pie, of Ritz apple pie. Why would you mock an apple pie? I said earlier, apples were ubiquitous in New England. Every town had their own favorites. If you look at Henry David Thoreau and the blue pearmain, his favorite, those apples are still around. People fixated on one type of apple, or often they would look at one apple as being a hand apple, another apple as being a baking apple, another one being a storage apple, another one being a cider apple. You had so many apples around, you did all sorts of different things. Why would you mock something like that? They're super abundant and super cheap. Well, the answer is that apples are ubiquitous in New England, but until the 19-teens or 1920s, New England was a very seasonal place to live. Apples come ripe in September, October, maybe into November. And sure enough, you can store them. You can put them in a barrel, you can put them in the basement, and they will last. They last well. The Baldwin, the favorite apple up until the crop was destroyed in the 1930s by a weather event, the Baldwin was a great keeper. But still, if you're eating these apples, you got them in September, October, November, you can eat them in December. But March comes rolling around, you're getting down to the bottom of the barrel. That's where that phrase comes from, right? And soon enough, all you got left are a bunch of punky apples that are a little overdone, a little over old, and by the summer coming around, you got nothing. You're through your apples, and you got to wait for the next crop to come in. So during this period of time, from let's say June to September, you've got no apples at all, and this is your favorite pie. This is the pie that New Englanders loved. So what they do is they find a substitute, the cracker pie. Now there are other excuses for it as well. There, you see this recipe appearing in cookbooks throughout the 19th century, and it's a super, super cheap recipe, relatively speaking. But one of the places that I saw it, which I find most interesting, was in the Confederate Women's Cookbook published in Richmond, Virginia in 1864 during the Civil War. A time when Richmond is surrounded by Union forces. There are no available apples for civilian population, at least. So what do? They make do the best. And that scarcity at periods of time is a great motive for people to have these kind of recipes and hold. In 1917, 1918, when America entered the First World War, there was a brief but very intense food scare about availability of food in North America. And people were thinking we're going to go hungry, or at least we're not going to have certain types of foods at all available to it. And one of my favorite cookbooks, favorite cookbook name anyway, came out at that period of time called Camouflage Cookery. And the cookbook is all about recipes that mimic something else. Now, we've lost that. We don't talk about mock cooking very much anymore. Occasionally you'll hear about it. But we've lost that because we're now in this world where seasonality has sort of disappeared. Refrigeration, transport, freezing have changed the way we address our food, the way we eat our food, the way we obtain our food. So I can go to Big E any day of the week, any day of the year, and find apples available for me. I can go there and find bananas for me, which are, I think, not a native New England fruit. You'll have to tell me since you're native New Englanders, but I can find all sorts of things there that would have been very scarce and very seasonal back in the day. There's one other really remarkable mock pie that I found. It's called a mock cherry pie. And the mock cherry pie is something that became I guess I'd call it a fad of sorts. The first recipe I found for it was about 1892, and it turns out to be very much like the mock apple pie in some ways. It's taking an ingredient, turning it into something that it is not, making it seem something different. In this case, what they took were raisins and cranberries. They cut the cranberries in half, the raisins in half, mix them together with vanilla and sugar, and you create a thing that tastes like cherry, oddly enough. And apparently it works. I've never actually made or tried one of these things. But cranberries are one of those really, truly unique New England foods, right? This is a native fruit for our region. The cranberry, this is a cranberry field near Centerfield in winter, right in December actually. You can see that winter color on the vines out here. This is an area that's been stripped and then sanded to get the vines to grow more vigorously with this irrigation channel right next to it. But this is a classic cranberry bog in Centerville area, and this is what they look like. And what happens is the cranberry industry begins as an industry after the War of 1812, and it grows slowly at first, but by the Civil War, the cranberry industry begins to take off. And it takes off in Massachusetts. Cranberries have always been eaten here. They've been gathered wild since the very beginning of English settlement, and much before that as well by natives. But right around 1820 or so, commercial production of cranberries began when a guy in Dennis, Mass, allegedly, not actually true, but I'll tell the lie anyway today, invented a way of planting and cultivating cranberries in his plot, and that started this cranberry industry that then began to explode. By the latter half of the 19th century, you have this great abundance of cranberries growing here with more and more people buying cranberry bogs, taking wasteland down there and turning it into profitable land. Great fortunes are made off of cranberries in Massachusetts in the 19th century. And what happens is this crop that had always been loved and eaten, very favorite in New England, suddenly became a very abundant thing. And it became abundant in September and October when cranberries are harvested. The harvest usually begins around September 1st, goes to mid or end of October, and then you go into winter season. But cranberries store, so you have lots and lots of cranberries available for the holidays, for Thanksgiving, and for Christmas. And then the cranberry industry up until really the 1930s just said we basically go to bed from December up until April when we begin to open up the fields again and begin to work. So you have this winter rest. It's not rest because they're doing other work. But cranberries are this massively abundant thing in this period of time, and they are loved. But how much cranberry can you eat? I mean, I love cranberries. I wrote a book on cranberries. I love cranberries. But you can only eat so much. I mean, I hate to tell you. So what they're doing here is the opposite. They're taking something that's super abundant, where you have it all over the place, and they're making it seem like something else so that your family will gag it down. And in this case, they make it seem like a cherry pie, which is second usually to apple pie as one of the most favorite pies in New England. And so cherries have this incredibly short season when they're ripe. Usually June, July, they come ripe and you eat cherries and you have fresh cherry pie. The rest of the year you don't have cherry pie. But when this recipe comes along in 1892, it says we can take this thing that we have too much of and we can make it seem like something we don't have enough of. And we can extend the life of cherry pie from June and July, maybe into August, all the way into September, October, November, December. So we can take a 2-month pie and make it a 6 or 8 month pie by using this extremely abundant fruit. So the cherry pie took off. This first recipe that I could find anyway is around 1892. By the late 1890s, if you went around to all of these little community cookbooks that are put out by usually women's groups, church groups, charitable groups to raise funds, and you flip to the pie section, there's a better chance than not that you're going to find mock cherry pie. There's one of these recipe books that I found in Maine from a woman's group where all the recipes are signed because everybody wanted to put their name on their favorite recipes. And there are 6, I would say, different recipes for mock cherry pie in there. And I say different, meaning they're exactly the same, but they're written by 6 people. So this is a very, very popular pie. It's also essentially disappeared. So let's get back to the question that I started with, and that's what is on this is my cat Margaret, who's a great thinker. But what is it then, going through this love of false pies and mock pies and all these other things, what is it that is authentic here? What makes something authentic? And I'll go back to Suzette, my mother-in-law's pie, and say that what you see when you look and you ask this question about what makes a pie authentic in New England is not whether it is a savory pie or a sweet pie, not whether it attains to a particular recipe that was popular in the 1850s, or maybe my grandmother's pie recipe exactly. It's what Suzette did, and that's you take the recipes that you have and you adapt them to the taste of your family. You make them use the things that you have on hand, and you skillfully turn them into something that your family loves. That's what makes authenticity. It's the act of producing the stuff, not the stuff itself. And we see this over and over and over in New England, where these pie recipes come and go, and people take them and they say, my little twist on this is to put a lattice top on. I don't add the clove, I substitute bells. I put in this kind of apple, but not those apples. It's those little things that make them really, truly authentic. So I'll leave it there. If you've got questions, I'll be glad to try to answer.
Eskimo
New England. Did not actually write about Eskimo pie, but and I will say that's the first time I've actually been asked about Eskimo pie. But it's an interesting idea. Why? Because New Englanders don't know what pie is, even though they love it. I haven't thought about Eskimo pie. I think it goes back to the 20s, if I remember right. But I don't know much about its origins and why it would have been called a pie, except that pies have this association with being a treat. And so that comes along and becomes a treat of itself, with the chocolate, I presume, being the pastry around which the thing is done. But
I think you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but I'm interested to know about when they started using more sugar in the pies as opposed to just a straight fruit.
It varies a lot, and it varies from cook to cook and cookbook to cookbook. But sugar has been there from the beginning. Sugar was prized. My favorite pie is rhubarb pie. Eat a rhubarb pie with no sugar. It doesn't happen. Sugar is there. It can take different forms. There are different kinds of sugars, different preparations of sugars in the 18th century. So that you have things that are, more a molasses-based thing, or a less refined sugar, or more refined sugar, a cake sugar, what do you call it? I'm forgetting the word right now.
Okay.
No, not a.
Like a
Anyway.
Sugarloaf thing.
Yeah, that's. Thank you.
I've seen them at the Plymouth
Yes.
plantation they have.
And you cut the sugar off, but these different presentations have different flavors to them. And sugar is a question in pie at various points in time. And I do write. I think I write about this in this book. I'm trying to remember now. But in the 18th century, late 18th century, last quarter of the 18th century, a group of abolitionists came up with the idea. Well, they didn't came up with the idea. They recognized that sugar was a slave-based commodity, and there was no way around it. Sugar was produced in the Caribbean and southern United States, almost exclusively by slave labor. Sugar was the center in one form or another in the slave system. And they proposed, as good New Englanders, actually the proposal came from Philadelphia, adopted up here in New England, to substitute a bunch of smallholders making maple sugar for cane sugar. And that caught off. There was a whole movement around this. Thomas Jefferson, slaveholder that he was entranced by the idea. And he actually planted sugar maples up at Monticello that promptly died on him. But the idea was that he liked the idea of a lot of small independent freeholders all throughout the free North producing this commodity that was widely prized and widely loved without using slave labor or free labor. My own ancestors include a group of abolitionists who were into the free produce movement of breaking away from sugar-based things because of their slave associations and moving towards maple sugar. That movement died in the early 19th century, but it was a moment in which New Englanders tried to stand up to the system and did the best they could. That sugar doesn't taste exactly the same. No two sugars taste exactly the same. So when you put them into a pie, you get different flavors, and that's part of what certainly would have gone on in the 19th century. But sugar was there and was consumed. The savory pie is obviously a different story, but those sweet pies, as far as I know, the recipes I've always seen are take fruit, add sugar, bake in crust. That's always the recipe at the end of the day. And I think it's interesting, there's a little bit of a back and forth conversation between people about those fruit pies. The very first pie I had when I was doing this book was put together by a friend of mine named Alan Young, who is a great old radical, lives up in Royalston. Alan was an old firebrand back in the day. He was a member of Liberation News Service, Gay Liberation Front, Students for Democratic Society, I think it was SDS. Alan went and lived on a commune up in Royalston starting in 72, 73 or so, and he's been up there, and his property up there has all these, by this point, all these fruit bushes around it, blueberries and so forth. And he said, come up, I'll make you a blueberry pie. I said, this is great, Alan, I'll come up. That was the pie I wanted to kick the book off, because it was a good New England pie. And he had a friend of his up visiting from Florida, who was an old friend from back in the day. And she said, no, Alan, it can't be a blueberry pie. We're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's mix blueberries and raspberries. And they had this debate. Alan saying, no, what you want in a good pie is the purity of fruit, the powerful flavor coming through, pushing its way through the crust. And Katja saying, no, the great pie is the marriage of two ideas coming together, mingling in a consolidated fashion. And I loved it. And Alan was right, for me. Ka's great. She's great. But I like Alan's idea. And that is, for me, the great thing of a pie, the sugar is there, sure enough, to make it palatable or to add a little bit of dimension to it. But the great thing in the best pies is that it takes whatever ingredient you have, and it brings that ingredient to its purest form. It takes the blueberry and makes it more blueberry. It takes the raspberry and makes it a little bit more raspberry. And so I'll stick by that. And I've totally gotten off topic here, but I love it. Alan's a good guy. I love it.
When I grew up, we had something called a quickie pie, which had nothing to do with carnal relations.
Was this a cream pie, sort of custard pie?
No,
No?
what you did, you sent away from Ronco or something like that. It was two like semi-cup shaped things on things that you pulled them together.
Yeah?
So you put a piece of bread, white bread, on the bottom, you put applesauce in the middle, you put another one on it, you clamped it tight, ripped off the crust, and held it over a fire. And that's called a quickie pie.
No kidding. Wow. And you ate these? I don't mean to ask, but you survived?
Here.
You probably wonder, right?
I've never actually heard of that. That's a very interesting take. But you can see it's got not pastry, but something like a pastry. No, I have not heard of those.
We know in the South you have pecan pie,
Oh, yeah.
and you only mentioned walnuts earlier.
Yeah,
But was there other use of nuts in some way?
there are, and it's funny. At the end of this, the structure of the book is that I took essentially one pie, sometimes a couple, for each month of the year, and talked about that one pie or that history of that one pie. So I'm going through and talking 12 pies. That's nowhere near enough to get all the pies that you talk about. And I skipped all the nut pies. I skipped all the cream pies. I skipped all of the custard pies. All of which are super popular in New England at different times. Nut pies are less common. Pecan, you have the walnut mix in. Some have almonds or pies, but there are not as many pies in New England anyway that I've run into that are nut forward, so to speak. Southern pies, to me, seem sweeter for the most part, and they push in a slightly different direction. They move away from the savory toward the sweet and go through the sweet to something that is teeth-shattering in some cases. But the nuts seem to be more a southern thing than a New England thing, from what I can see.
I made a chestnut pie once. It
Is that right?
was so heavy. It was terrible.
Yeah, there are, when you go through these old cookbooks, you'll find recipes here and there that just seem quite strange. And some of them are actually good, and some of them are actually terrible. Mincemeat was always my most terrifying moment as a kid. My grandmother always insisted on mincemeat at Christmas, and it's oh man, I'm not gonna eat that. And my father was a pathologist, and my grandmother always said, you can tell your children are pathologists. All you do is ask what's in that thing, just eat it. And that was not us. We knew what was in that thing. But mincemeat has been around. It has literally a medieval flavor profile, and it's been around forever and ever and ever. And if you look through these cookbooks, you'll find these very bizarre recipes for lemon mince or tomato mince or other kinds of mince where they're playing with the recipe to try to take it to a slightly different place. They try to mimic the flavor profile in a lot of ways, but they'll use various different kinds of ingredients. And some of them are successful, some of them I'm sure are not. I find no mince successful.
Weren't they also used to cover up the taste of spoiled meat?
That's one thing you read. What I see is that medieval flavors, they liked the mixture, the marriage of sweet and savory and spice all together. And so they're often mixing these things. And you look at early 18th century recipes for mince, they have suet is the base. And then you add in raisins and apples and other kinds of fruits. You'll add your meats, which will be, if they're fancy, they'll be a tongue or, what do you call them? Not tripe, but pancreas. What's pancreas called? Sweetbreads. So you have a bunch of different kinds of meats, usually which are the milder meats that are mixed in to create this thing that they call mincemeat. It was enormously popular. People loved this stuff for years and years. By the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, you start seeing vegetarian versions of this coming about. And some of it is actually out of consideration for health. there are people looking at mincemeat pie and saying, what you're eating is a stick of lard or suet with stuff in it. So whatever flavor it's masking, it's not doing terribly successfully. But what I find interesting is that English cooking, starting around 1700, American cooking starting around the same time, begin to deviate from that old complex medieval flavor system. And in England, they look at it and they say, that's a French thing, and we move towards a simpler English style. In America, we go even further. It gets tied up in this Puritan aesthetic first of simplicity, and then later this Republican, this American Republic sense of simplicity, saying we are not Europe, we are not aristocrats, we are not this old decrepit government system that they have out there, or this old culture out there. We are Americans and we have simple, austere American ingredients. So American pies get simpler and simpler and simpler and simpler, American foods in general, with a few exceptions, one of which is mince. And mince, because it was so popular, so tied to the Christmas season, especially Thanksgiving to a lesser degree, it just stuck around. It had its place and it stuck around. I am still hoping to see it die in my lifetime, but it is still there.
I have another pie story. I was in Worcester bus station luncheonette in the 70s.
Yeah.
And an African-American guy got off the bus, obviously from down south, came in, sat down, and asked the waitress for a slice of sweet potato pie. And nobody in the place knew what he was, they thought he was joking.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Sweet potato pie, people ask about that frequently because Southerners love it, right? You do see it in New England, it's not common. And it doesn't surprise that they wouldn't have known about it in Worcester in the 70s at all. But you do occasionally see it in recipes coming up here, people reading about it in the South saying, hey, we can do this. But, you know, it's one of those, the closest we have up here is the squash pie. And the squash pie is somewhat similar in some ways. It's not the same flavor, but it's the same direction. I thought you were going to talk about Table Talk, which is a good old Worcester company. I love Table Talk. And I think Table Talk now, I think they do or did make a sweet potato pie for a while. So,
I've seen them in supermarkets.
yeah. Table Talk is great. I love Table Talk. I like bad food too, but Table Talk is not bad food.
My family's holiday tradition, Christmas time, New Year's, was clam pie.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think that my grandfather's family from Connecticut.
I was going to say Connecticut. Yeah, clam pie, you'll see it in two places. You see it along Connecticut shore, Long Island.
Yeah, Stanford.
And then you'll see it someplace on the Cape. But I didn't end up writing clam pie. I ended up doing the cranberry chapter, I think, is what I did at the end. But clam pie is a very local, very New England pie.
Salt pork, potatoes, clams. Great.
Yeah, and there are people who love it, but for some reason it doesn't travel. I mean, you really see it in that region, but go 20 miles inland, you know, no one knows what you're talking about. And it is interesting, the seafood pies, the chapter I didn't do was seafood pie with clam pie being one of them. Seafood pies have that intense commitment on the shore, but for whatever reason, even though the fish get inland, the pie part doesn't so much.
Right, so he was from Stanford, which is
Uh-huh.
on the shore. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys said.
It's close enough, you know. But yeah, clam pie is interesting, and there are people who are really quite fanatic about particular ways of preparing it and so forth, and how the crust has to be a puff crust as opposed to a regular crust. But it's an interesting thing, but it is very, very localized. I had not heard of it in Massachusetts until somebody out in the Cape told me, oh yeah, we used to make it down in Fairhaven or whatever heck it was. But it's not super common. Barnstable, I think it was Barnstable. Anything else? If not, there is pie.
There we go.